He never robbed a bank. He never held a gun. He never threatened anyone face to face. There was no mask, no police sirens cutting through the night, no high-speed chases through city streets. And yet, with a single website, he changed the internet forever. For years, federal investigators searched for a name that didn't exist. No address, no real records, no face to identify. Only an idea, a belief that the internet should be absolutely free, that people should be able to trade with one another without asking permission. That power, laws and borders were outdated concepts in a new world. To its creator, this wasn't a crime. It was a way of life. Freedom, privacy, no control, and for a brief moment the idea seemed to work. No chaos, no immediate collapse, just quiet transactions happening behind screens. People who had never met, trusting each other through encryption and belief. He didn't see himself as a villain. He didn't wake up every morning thinking about destroying the world. In his mind, this was an experiment, proof that the old system was broken, that people could govern themselves if given freedom. But there was one thing he failed to anticipate, that every system, no matter how perfect it seems, is still run by humans. And humans always leave traces behind. It takes only a moment of carelessness, one small decision, one piece of yourself exposed without meaning to. That moment turned a ghost into a real man. And from that second on, the game began. Before the name Silk Road ever appeared in indictments, Ross Ulbricht was simply a young man trying to find his place in the modern world. He didn't grow up around violence. He didn't live on the margins of society. He didn't carry a criminal past. Ross was well educated. He read constantly. He thought deeply. And he asked more questions than most people around him. Friends remember him as calm, polite, slightly reserved. Not loud. Not attention-seeking. Always listening before he spoke. Ross was interested in economics, but not for quick wealth. He studied philosophy, but not to win arguments. He was obsessed with one simple question. Why do systems created to serve people eventually end up controlling them? In Ross's view, markets shouldn't have gatekeepers. Money shouldn't require permission, and freedom shouldn't come with conditions. He didn't hate the government. He didn't resent the law. He simply believed they were outdated. Ross saw the world as an old machine where massive gears crushed small individuals, and he believed technology could fix that. In his mind, a truly free market would force people to take responsibility for their own choices. No one coerced. No one deceived. Every transaction voluntary. That wasn't the dream of a criminal. It was the dream of an idealist. But ideals are often most dangerous when they are believed to be absolutely right. Ross failed to see a clear boundary between ideas and consequences, between belief and reality. He believed that if the goal was good, the path would automatically be right. That belief led him to the next step, not out of greed, not for power, but from a desire to prove himself right. And from that moment on, Ross was no longer just a man thinking. He began to become a man acting. The idea did not become reality in a reckless moment. It grew slowly, in silence, through long nights in front of a computer screen. For Ross Ulbricht, this was not a dangerous leap. It felt like a logical process, one step at a time, thoughts carefully translated into code. He did not believe he was building a marketplace. He believed he was building a principle, a space where people could decide the value of everything themselves, without a middleman. When the first version went live, it looked almost too simple. No flashy design, no spectacle, just lists, prices, and short descriptions. There were no gunshots, no red warnings, no visible signs of danger, only transactions. Strangers found one another, trusted one another, without knowing real names, faces, or personal histories. And what overwhelmed Ross was not the money. It was the order. Everything worked. Everything followed a structure. Disputes were resolved through logic. Reputation was built through behavior. In that moment, he felt validated. That people could regulate themselves without being forced. That freedom did not automatically lead to chaos. With each passing day, the system grew slightly larger, slightly more stable, slightly more complex. At the same time, A new feeling emerged inside Ross. Not excitement, but control. Not control over people. Control over structure. He became the one who resolved disputes, the one who maintained balance, the one who set the first boundaries. And it was here that the line began to blur. Because once a system needs an operator, it is no longer fully free. And when one person decides what is acceptable and what is not, power has entered the room. Ross did not notice the shift right away. To him, this was responsibility, a necessary role to keep the idea alive. But power rarely arrives looking dangerous. It comes quietly, reasonably, always carrying the promise that everything is still under control. This was the moment when a pure idea began to carry the weight of the real world. And from that point on, the path back was no longer clear. While Silk Road operated quietly like an invisible machine, somewhere else, real people were beginning to take notice. Not because of noise, not because of sensational headlines, but because of money. To the Federal Bureau of Investigation, money always leaves a trail. Not immediately, not clearly, but enough to make experienced investigators stop and look closer. They did not see Silk Road as a philosophy. They saw it as a system. A place where relationships formed, where habits repeated, where people, even hidden behind technology, still behaved according to very old patterns. The investigators did not rush. They did not raid. They did not announce anything. They watched. Long nights in quiet offices. Screens glowing in the dark. Reports read and reread until even the smallest details became familiar. This was not a hunt for a man on the run. It was the patience of waiting for someone to reveal himself. On the other side of the screen, Ross believed he was safe. He trusted encryption. He trusted distance. He believed that if no one knew who he was, no one could reach him. And for a long time, he was right. The silence continued. No signs of surveillance. No warnings. That silence only made Ross's confidence stronger. But to investigators, silence never means emptiness. It is space for data to collect, for fragments to wait until the day they connect. They began to notice repetitions, familiar choices, behavior that carried a personal signature. Not enough for charges, but enough for suspicion. And suspicion is the most dangerous thing in an investigation. Because once it exists, time favors the more patient side. Ross did not know that somewhere, people were learning how to understand him. Not through his face, but through his decisions, through how he responded to pressure. He believed he was controlling an impersonal system, when in reality, the system was reflecting who he truly was. The confrontation had not yet surfaced. No gunshots, no handcuffs, just two sides staring at screens. One believing he was invisible, the other believing that no one stays invisible forever. And when those two beliefs exist at the same time, tension begins to form, quietly, slowly, but inevitably. In the end, what weakens every system is not technology, not encryption, not servers or algorithms. It is the human element. No one can live their entire life as a ghost, no matter how intelligent, no matter how careful. Because people need to speak. They need to explain themselves. They need to be understood. Ross spent countless hours thinking about freedom, about ethics, about the world he believed was right. And then, like so many others, he wanted to share those thoughts. Not under his real name, not with his face, just with words. Sentences scattered across the internet. Fragments of debate. Opinions that seemed harmless on the surface. For Ross, this was release. A way to preserve a piece of his humanity inside a cold, mechanical system. But to those watching, it was a signal, not clear enough to conclude, not strong enough to accuse, but familiar. The phrasing, the logic, the idealistic lens through which the world was described. The pieces began to align slowly, quietly, without urgency. Ross did not realize that what made him unique was also what exposed him. He was not just running a system. He was leaving a personal imprint on every decision. The way he handled disputes, the way he responded when challenged, the way he defended his beliefs against doubt. All of it carried the breath of a real person. And when a system starts reflecting the personality of its creator, anonymity becomes a very thin shell. Ross believed that any mistake, if it came, would be technical. A flaw, a gap in the code. He never considered that the breaking point would be himself, his need to be understood, his desire to prove he was right, his belief that intellect could rise above every boundary. There was no sudden collapse, just a very small crack, but that crack was enough to let the light in. And once light enters, darkness is no longer an absolute refuge. The breaking point did not arrive as a heavy blow. It came as quiet exhaustion, as the sense that he had gone too far to turn back. From that moment on, the question was no longer whether Ross had made a mistake. It was when that mistake would be seen. And once a human leaves traces behind, time becomes only a matter of arrangement. At some point, Ross began living two lives at the same time. One life was ordinary, quiet, carefully unnoticed. He appeared like anyone else, unremarkable, invisible in plain sight, and then the screen lit up and the other life began. There, Ross Ulbricht was no longer an individual searching for meaning. He became the center of a system, a place where every decision led back to a single point. Messages arrived without pause, questions, complaints, disputes demanding resolution. At first, Ross saw it as responsibility, something necessary to keep the idea from collapsing. He told himself that without someone holding balance, everything would fall into chaos. But responsibility, when it stretches on, easily becomes power. Ross grew accustomed to being heard, accustomed to deciding what was right, what was acceptable. He did not realize that each small decision pushed him further from his original ideal. A system without control, a truly free market. Instead, a new order began to take shape, with Ross at its center, not because he sought domination, but because that was how the system slowly evolved. Living two lives began to leave its marks. Sleepless nights, long stretches of silence. In the real world, Ross remained an ordinary man, but in his mind he never truly left the system. He carried it in his thoughts, in his decisions, in the fear that if he let go, everything would collapse. Power rarely arrives like a storm. It comes softly, reasonably, always presenting itself as necessary. Ross still believed he was protecting an idea, but he could no longer see that the idea had begun to serve the survival of the system itself, and his place within it. The two parallel lives did not collide right away. They existed side by side, until the distance between them became unbearable. In that moment, Ross was no longer defending a belief. He was defending his role. And when power becomes tied to identity, ideals bend easily, slowly, quietly, but inevitably. The ending did not arrive with an explosion. No sirens, no breathless chase. It came with a kind of cold normality, a public space, people passing one another unaware, a moment that seemed harmless in the rhythm of everyday life. The laptop was open. The system was still running. Familiar lines of text filled the screen. At that moment, Ross Ulbricht still believed he was in control, that the distance between him and the real world remained intact, that no one could see behind the invisible curtain. And then, within a few short seconds, everything shifted. No drama was required, no long explanations, just the presence of people who had waited long enough. Calm eyes, decisive movements. In that instant, Ross understood something he had never fully accepted before, that the system could no longer protect him. That technology could not stand forever between a human being and consequences. There was no chance to close the screen, no time to think further. The illusion of invisibility dissolved in silence. Ross was not arrested like a man on the run. He was arrested like a human being pulled back into the real world. Every philosophy suddenly felt distant. Every argument suddenly felt small. What stood in front of him was no longer encryption or ideas. It was reality. In the interrogation room, no one asked about his original dream. No one asked what he had hoped to prove. There were only questions of responsibility, of consequences that could not be undone. That moment was not just the collapse of a system. It was the collapse of a belief. The belief that intellect could stand above consequence, that good intentions would make the cost small. Ross looked back on the path he had taken, not with immediate regret, but with shock, because what had vanished was not only his freedom, it was the image of the person he believed he was becoming. And when the illusion breaks, What remains is only a human being, facing what he has created. After the moment of arrest, the story did not end. It simply changed form, slower, heavier. Courtrooms replaced computer screens. Lawyers replaced anonymous debates, and time began to be measured in years, no longer in minutes. For Ross Ulbricht, the world narrowed to walls and fixed schedules. Ideas that once traveled freely were now forced to face the cold reality of the legal system. The law does not argue philosophy. It does not weigh intentions the way people do. It looks at outcomes. Numbers were read aloud, indictments presented, actions listed in an impersonal, clinical tone. Outside the courtroom, public opinion split. Some saw Ross as an indefensible criminal, a symbol of the danger that emerges when technology escapes control. Others saw a human being who had gone too far with his ideals. Someone who believed absolute freedom could exist, until reality proved otherwise. Debates erupted everywhere. In the media, within the tech community, between those who valued privacy above all else and those who placed security first. The questions were no longer only about Ross. They spread across society. How free should the internet be? Who has the right to set limits? And when a system causes harm, where responsibility truly lies? Meanwhile, at the center of every argument, Ross grew silent. No longer a guiding voice. No longer a decision maker. He became an individual defined by a verdict. Supporters argued over the severity of the sentence. Opponents saw it as inevitable. But there was something discussed far less. The space between two images. Between the mastermind described in legal documents and the man who once sat alone, believing he was doing the right thing. The consequences were not only a sentence. They were the collapse of a story. An idea that once inspired trust, now transformed into a warning. And as society continued to debate, Ross quietly stepped into a different role. No longer the creator of a system, but evidence of the price paid when belief collides with the real world. When everything has closed, the servers fall silent, transactions stop, the debates slowly fade. What remains is not a website, not a verdict, but a question. That question is not only for Ross Ulbricht. It is for all of us. Ross believed that if technology became powerful enough, humanity could move beyond old limits. That if systems were intelligent enough, morality would regulate itself. But this story reveals something else. Technology does not erase human nature. It amplifies it. Belief can create freedom. But absolute belief can also blur consequences. Ross was not a monster. He was not a saint. He was a human being who believed deeply in what he thought was right. And that belief carried him farther than he ever imagined. Perhaps the most important question is not whether Silk Road was right or wrong. It is when an idea stops being an ideal and begins to become a burden for the person who created it. The internet continues to evolve. Technology keeps moving forward. New systems will continue to emerge. But every time we believe we have built a world without responsibility, history reminds us that no system exists outside humanity. Because at the center of every line of code, every algorithm, every complex network, are profoundly human decisions. Fragile, imperfect, and capable of being wrong. This story does not end with a judgment. It ends with a reminder that the most dangerous thing is not technology itself. It is the moment when humans believe their convictions are strong enough to exempt them from consequences. And that question remains unanswered. For Ross, for the internet, and for all of us. When this story ends, the internet doesn't stop. It keeps moving, quietly, relentlessly, because the real danger was never the website, or the technology, or even the man behind it. It was the moment someone believed that being unseen meant being untouchable. Technology doesn't remove human nature. It amplifies it. And history has shown, power always tests who we really are. So the final question isn't how far we can push the system. It's whether we know when to stop before belief turns into damage and intention turns into consequence. This story is not just about one person. It's about how human beings confront power when no one is watching. The first lesson lies in a very old truth. Technology does not change human nature. It only expands human capability for both good and bad. When people are given power without immediate accountability, it becomes easy to confuse ideals with privilege, freedom with immunity from consequences. And when belief turns absolute, it begins to blur moral boundaries. The second lesson is about isolation. The most dangerous decisions are rarely made in chaos, they are made in silence. When a person speaks only to themselves, belief is no longer tested. No one challenges it. No one reminds them that consequences always exist, no matter how pure the intention. The third lesson is about the human behind the system. Every system, no matter how complex, ultimately carries the imprint of its creator. Their way of thinking, their decision-making, their response to pressure. There is no true anonymity when humans remain at the center of control. And from these lessons, the solution is not to stop technology, nor is it to fear innovation. The solution lies in how we build limits. Limits are not meant to suppress creativity, they exist to protect humans from their own blindness. Systems with real influence require more than a single mind. They require dialogue. They require challenge. They require self-regulating mechanisms not just through code, but through real people. The next solution is education about responsibility alongside freedom. Not teaching people only how to do something, but how to think about the cost. Every choice carries consequences, and the absence of immediate consequences does not mean they do not exist. Finally, the most important solution lies in personal awareness, the ability to pause, to question, and to accept that no one stands outside shared morality simply because they believe they are right. This story does not end with a verdict, but with a reminder that in the digital world, where everything moves fast, what protects us is not stronger systems. It is the ability to keep belief tied to responsibility. Because the most dangerous moment is not when humans gain power. It is when they believe that power no longer needs oversight.